So time is up. Let's check the answers. What is the setting of the story? Time and place. Referring to the text, sometime long ago. That's the time. In a faraway kingdom is the place. Now, moving on to the second element, which is character. The character, when we talk about a character, it is the person or a thing that is having a role in the story. So he is the one that is representing and playing a major role in the story. It can be a person, an animal, or a thing, as long as he or she are having a main role or it is having a role in the story. Now, in the character, there is also a characteristics. So usually while reading, you have to pay attention to the characteristics of the character. Sometimes in some stories, it's directly mentioned. In others, it's hidden. So the reader has to be paying attention to the hidden messages. Now, for example, for the bounder and the king, there were 4 main characters. So what I want you to do is, I want you to recall the 4 characters and give me the characteristics of that character with the evidence. What do I mean? For example, the king. The characteristics, wise and clever. Why did I say he is wise and clever? Because from the text, he chose the next king in a very clever way by placing a bounder in the middle of the road and finding the person who has enough sense of responsibility to move on. So again, the direct message describing the characteristics of the character was very clever, whereas the wise was embedded by telling you that he created a problem, and then whoever is going to provide a solution for that problem, he or she will be the king. Similarly, I want you to write about the other 3 characters, their characteristics and the evidence. I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. Now, what I want you to do is that I want you to remember the characteristics of the plot or of the short story that we just read. Try to note them down. We talked about 4 main characters, and what I want you to do is that I want you to think about their characteristics. Remember what I said earlier in the previous slide, that the characteristics, some of the messages are direct, so they will tell you a direct and indirectly that this king is clever, for example, whereas in the other characters it's mentioned through his behavior, so this is the indirect. And I want you to also provide an evidence with an example from the story if you can recall. For example, the king, wise and clever. He chose the next king in a very clever way by placing a blunder in the middle of the road and finding the person who has enough sense of responsibility to move it. So the direct characteristics was mentioned the next king in a very clever way, whereas wise by creating the conflict. So he created a problem, and whoever is going to solve that problem, he or she will be the king. So he chose it wisely. Based on that, the characteristics was wise and clever. Similarly, I want you to write the other three characters and their characteristics with evidence. If you remember the evidence, or at least just write what you remember that could be chosen as, or that could be written as a proof of what you read. I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. Now, let's check the answers. The wealthiest person, the characteristics, arrogant. Why did we say that he is arrogant? Because he bitterly complained that he was too rich to have a blunder in his way. The other character, the town's smartest person, irresponsible, no sense of initiative, because she refused to move the blunder. Last but not least, the farmer, because he showed that he was responsible, caring, and hardworking. How? He worked very hard to move the blunder because other people might need to use this road. Moving on, the third element is a plot. The plot refers to the events of the story in general, the beginning, the conflict, and the resolution, which is solving the problem. So the plot is kind of when you summarize the whole story to your friend. So for example, when I'm telling you, what is this story about? What he or she, the person, would be telling me is the plot. They will summarize the entire thing to me. Okay, now what I want you to do here is, since we are talking about the plot, I want you to reorder the events that are mentioned here according to the timeline. I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. Read them and reorder them. Now, let's check your answers.